Richard Thompson stood in his opulent office, high above the bustling streets of New York City, the skyline stretching out before him like a glittering tapestry of ambition and dream. The late afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm glow on the rich mahogany furniture and the carefully curated art that adorned the walls. He exuded charisma and confidence, his tailored suit hugging his athletic frame perfectly. But beneath that polished exterior lurked a hint of arrogance, a reflection of his success in the cutthroat world of business. As he leaned back in his leather chair, his eyes flickered across the documents spread out before him, a deal that would further cement his empire. "This partnership will redefine our market position," he declared, his voice rich with enthusiasm as he spoke on the phone with a prospective client. "I assure you our resources and expertise will exceed your expectation." He felt a rush of adrenaline at the thought of closing yet another significant deal. But even as he spoke, his mind drifted elsewhere, to a more personal realm that had recently begun to feel increasingly complicated. His thoughts turned to Emily, his devoted wife. They had shared a life filled with laughter, romance, and mutual respect. But lately, a subtle distance had crept into their relationship. Richard couldn't quite pinpoint when it had started, but he knew he had been preoccupied with work, often leaving Emily to navigate the quieter moments of their lives alone. He shook his head slightly, trying to dispel the nagging feeling that he was losing something vital. "Richard, can you hold for a moment?" he said, raising a hand to his ear as he glanced at the clock. It was nearly 6 o'clock, and he had promised Emily they would have dinner together. "I'll call you back shortly." He ended the call, leaned back in his chair, and took a deep breath, preparing himself for the transition from corporate titan to loving husband. Meanwhile, in their upscale apartment, Emily Thompson moved gracefully around the kitchen, the tantalizing aroma of rosemary and garlic wafting through the air. She had set the table with care, her favorite china gleaming under the soft light of the chandelier. Candles flickered gently, casting a romantic glow that she hoped would rekindle the warmth they had once shared. As she plated the perfectly seared salmon, she couldn't help but reminisce about the early days of their love. "Remember our first dinner together?" she mused aloud, a wistful smile gracing her lips. She recalled the cramped little bistro where they had shared their first meal, the way Richard had leaned in, his laughter infectious as he told stories about his childhood. Back then, their connection had felt effortless, a vibrant tapestry woven from passion and understanding. But now, it felt as though a veil had descended between them, and she was desperately trying to pierce through it. As she set the last plate on the table, Emily felt a twinge of unease. She had sensed Richard's growing distance in recent weeks, his late-night meetings, and distracted conversations. She longed for the intimacy they once had, the spontaneous laughter that often filled their home. "Maybe tonight will be different," she whispered to herself, steeling her resolve. "Maybe we can find our way back to each other." Just as she finished arranging the table, the sound of the front door opening echoed through the apartment, and her heart leapt in anticipation. "Richard," she called out, her voice bright and welcoming. She hurried to the living room, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Hey, Em?" Richard stepped inside, his presence filling the room as he removed his jacket, revealing the crisp white shirt beneath. He flashed her a charming smile, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sorry I'm late. Work was insane today." She forced a smile, her stomach tightening. "I made your favorite. Thought we could enjoy a nice dinner together." Richard's expression softened, and he stepped closer, wrapping an arm around her waist. "You're amazing. I've been looking forward to this all day." He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, but even in that tender moment, Emily sensed a slight hesitation in him, a flicker of something unspoken. As they sat down to dinner, the conversation flowed, but beneath the surface, an undercurrent of tension lingered. Richard shared anecdotes from the office, recounting the details of his day with animated gestures, but Emily found herself distracted, her mind racing with thoughts of their recent distance. She wanted to ask him about it, to voice her concerns, but the words caught in her throat like a stubborn knot. "Anyway," Richard continued, his voice brightening, "we're finalizing that merger next week. It's going to be huge for the company." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes sparkling with ambition. "I might even take us on a little vacation to celebrate." Emily smiled weakly, her heart sinking slightly. "That sounds wonderful, Richard. She hesitated, searching for the right words. "I hope you'll have time for us during all this. I miss you." Richard's smile faltered for a moment, and he looked away as if the weight of her words had settled heavily on his shoulders. "You know how it is, Em. This is a critical time for the business. I promise I'll make time for us, but I need to focus now." The response felt dismissive, and Emily's heart sank further. She nodded, forcing herself to swallow the disappointment. "Of course. I understand." After dinner, they moved to the living room, where Richard poured 2 glasses of wine, the rich red liquid swirling as he filled the glasses. Emily settled onto the plush couch, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled in the pit of her stomach. Just then, Richard's phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up with a notification. He glanced at it, his brow furrowing slightly. "1 second, I need to take this," he said, standing up and stepping away to answer the call. Emily watched him, her heart heavy as she listened to the one-sided conversation. It was a business call, of course, but the way Richard's demeanor shifted, the urgency in his voice, made her feel like an outsider in her own home. She took a sip of her wine, trying to focus on the flickering flames of the fireplace, but her mind drifted elsewhere. As Richard ended the call, he returned to the couch, his expression somewhat distant. "Sorry about that. Just some last-minute details to iron out." He leaned back, running a hand through his hair, and Emily felt a pang of longing for the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had once made her feel like the center of his universe. "Richard," she began hesitantly, her heart racing. "I know work is important, but Before she could finish, he interrupted her, a hint of impatience in his tone. I know. I just need to get through this project, and things will settle down. Trust me." Emily bit her lip, the familiar sting of insecurity creeping in. "It's not just about the project, Richard. I feel like we're drifting apart. I miss you." Richard's expression softened momentarily, but then he shrugged it off, his gaze drifting to the city lights outside. "You worry too much. Let's just enjoy our evening." As the night wore on, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Richard had always been her rock, the one who made her feel cherished and secure. But now, with every passing moment, that sense of security felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the arrival of something, or someone, new in their life. Later that week, Richard returned home later than usual, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the hallway as he entered their apartment. Emily was already in her pajamas, curled up with a book on the couch. She looked up, her heart lifting slightly at the sight of him, but the moment was quickly clouded by a sense of anxiety. "Hey you," he greeted, his voice a little too casual. "Sorry, got caught up at the office again. Another late night?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. "You've been working a lot lately." "Just closing some deals," he said, moving to the kitchen to pour himself a drink. "Oh, by the way, I wanted to mention something. I hired a new secretary today. Her name is Jessica. She's brilliant and beautiful, and I think she's going to be a great asset to the team." The words hit Emily like a punch to the gut, and she felt her breath catch in her throat. "Jessica?" she repeated, forcing the name out as a lump formed in her throat. "Is that so?" "Yeah, she's got a fresh perspective on things, really sharp, you know. I think she's going to shake things up in a good way," Richard said, his enthusiasm palpable. Emily's heart sank further. "You think she's beautiful?" Question slipped from her lips before she could stop it, a wave of insecurity washing over her. Richard's brow furrowed slightly. "I mean, it's not like that," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "I appreciate talent. You know that." The evening sun cast a warm glow over the bustling city, filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the lavish venue where Richard Thompson was hosting a company event. Emily Thompson stood by the bar, a glass of wine in hand, scanning the crowd. She wore a stunning emerald dress that accentuated her figure, but her heart wasn't in the celebration. She felt like an outsider in her own life, the vibrant laughter and lively chatter around her fading into a distant hum. "Emily!" A voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned to see Jessica approaching. The young secretary radiated confidence, her glossy hair cascading over her shoulders, and her smile was as disarming as it was beautiful. "Hi, Jessica," Emily replied, forcing a smile. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind, preparing herself for the inevitable encounter with the woman who had already begun to invade her thoughts. "Richard's really impressed with you," Jessica said, her eyes sparkling with admiration. "I mean the way you handle the charity events and the fundraising. Everyone talks about it." "Thank you," Emily said, her voice lacking its usual warmth. "I try to keep us involved in the community." She glanced around, spotting Richard across the room, animatedly discussing a new project with a group of executives. The pride in his demeanor was palpable, and her heart sank. Was there space for her in his world now that Jessica was part of it? "Look at him," Jessica said, following Emily's gaze. "He's so passionate about his work. You must be very proud." I am," Emily managed to reply. "He works hard." Jessica stepped closer, her tone shifting to one of conspiratorial intimacy. "I think you two are such a great couple. You complement each other so well. It's inspiring." Emily's heart twisted. She could hear the genuine admiration in Jessica's voice, but it only deepened her insecurities. "We've been married for a while," she said, her tone slightly defensive. "It takes a lot of work." "Of course." Jessica laughed lightly, the sound ringing like a bell. "But you both seem to make it look easy." "Thank you," Emily said, though the compliment felt hollow. She could see Richard's gaze flickering toward them, and she felt a rush of heat on her cheeks. He offered her a smile, the kind that used to make her feel special, but tonight it felt different, tinged with something she couldn't quite place. "Excuse me, I need to grab Richard," Emily said abruptly, her voice tight. She turned on her heel, leaving Jessica's gaze behind her. As she approached Richard, she noticed the way he leaned toward Jessica, his laughter mingling with hers, creating a bubble that felt impenetrable. She cleared her throat, stepping into their line of sight. "Richard," she called, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. He turned, his smile brightening as he caught sight of her. "Emily, come join us. This was just an introduction," Jessica said, stepping back slightly, her eyes flitting between the couple. "I'll get us drinks." Emily watched as Jessica walked away, her figure swaying effortlessly. Richard placed a hand on Emily's back, his touch warm and reassuring, but it did little to ease the tension swirling inside her. "Did you have a chance to talk to Jessica?" Richard asked, genuine curiosity lacing his voice. "Yes, she's very charming," Emily replied, choosing her words carefully. "You seem to work well together," Richard chuckled, shaking his head. "She's a breath of fresh air in the office, smart, talented. I really think she's going to help us take things to the next level." "Right," Emily said, forcing a smile. "I can see that." As the evening wore on, Emily tried to engage with the guests, but her mind kept drifting back to Jessica. The young woman had a way of drawing people in, and it left Emily feeling like she was fading into the background. Later that night, as they returned home, the silence in the car was palpable. Richard was preoccupied, scrolling through his phone, while Emily stared out of the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of color. "Did you have fun tonight?" he asked, breaking the silence as they pulled into their driveway. "It was fine," Emily replied, her heart heavy. "Jessica seems really great." "Yeah, she is," Richard said, his eyes still glued to his phone. "I think she's going to bring a lot of energy to the team." Emily clenched her jaw, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "You seem to really enjoy working with her." Richard finally looked up, a frown creasing his brows. "Emily, what's this really about? We've talked about the importance of a good team, and she's just a colleague." "Sure, Richard, just a colleague," Emily replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "But it doesn't feel like that to me. It feels like you're more interested in her than in me." "Come on, that's not fair," he snapped, his tone sharpening. "You know that's not true. I love you, Emily. You're my wife." "Then why do I feel like I'm losing you?" Emily's voice trembled, tears threatening to spill over. "You're always busy with work, and now you have her there too. I feel like I'm competing for your attention." Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "You're not competing with anyone. I'm just trying to build my business. I thought you understood that." Emily shook her head, hurt flashing across her face. "I do understand, but it doesn't change how I feel. You're the one who brought her into our lives, and now I can't help but feel threatened." Richard crossed his arms, the tension between them palpable. "You're overreacting, Emily. I need a secretary who can handle the workload. That's all this is it?" she challenged, her heart racing. "Because it feels like there's something more, and I don't know how to deal with it." "Maybe you should just trust me more," he replied, his frustration evident. "I thought we were past this kind of insecurity." Emily turned away, the conversation spiraling into a territory she had hoped to avoid. She felt the distance between them growing, a chasm filled with unspoken fears and insecurities. As the silence enveloped their home, Emily felt the weight of isolation settle upon her. She had always shared her thoughts and feelings with Richard, but now she questioned whether he would truly understand her fears. The next day, Emily met her best friend Sarah for lunch, desperately needing to voice her concern. They sat in a cozy cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the air. "Hey, you look a little stressed," Sarah said, stirring her drink. "What's going on?" Emily sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's Richard and Jessica. I just feel so uneasy about her. It's like she's taken over his life. You need to talk to him about this," Sarah urged, her eyes filled with concern. "You can't let these feelings fester. Communication is key." "I know. But every time I try, he brushes me off. He thinks I'm being irrational," Emily said, frustration spilling over. "What if I push him further away?" "Emily, you can't live in fear of your own feelings. You deserve to express what you're feeling without being dismissed," Sarah said firmly. I don't want to lose him," Emily whispered, her voice cracking. "Then fight for your relationship. You have to let him know how this is affecting you," Sarah encouraged, placing a comforting hand on Emily's. Emily nodded, her resolve strengthening. Deep down, she knew that if she didn't confront Richard about her insecurities, the distance between them would only continue to grow. As she left the cafe, she felt a flicker of determination ignite within her. She would find a way to bridge the gap, even if it meant facing her fears head-on. As the weeks rolled on, the once vibrant energy of Emily and Richard's marriage began to fade, overshadowed by the frequent late nights Richard spent at the office. Emily sat alone in their lavish apartment, the opulent decor a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing in her heart. She found herself trapped in a web of suspicion and insecurity, her thoughts spiraling as she replayed every interaction between Richard and Jessica in her mind. The laughter they shared at company events echoed in her ears, a haunting reminder of the intimacy she feared was blossoming between them. One evening, as she tidied up the living room, her gaze fell on Richard's phone, carelessly left on the coffee table. An impulsive urge washed over her. She hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding, then picked it up, the weight of her decision heavy in her hands. As she unlocked the device, her breath caught in her throat when she saw the screen filled with messages from Jessica. "Hey, just wanted to check in. Hope you're not working too late. Gachi can bring dinner if you want. Just let me know." The casual tone of their exchanges twisted her stomach into knots. Emmy's mind raced. Were these merely friendly messages, or was there something more lurking beneath the surface? A sense of betrayal washed over her, and she felt a hot flush creep up her neck. "Richard," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. There was no response. She glanced at the clock. It was late, and he was likely still at the office. Anger and sadness coiled tightly in her chest as she returned to the messages, scrolling through several more that revealed a rapport she found increasingly unsettling. I can't wait for our meeting tomorrow. I always look forward to seeing you. Emily's heart raced. The laughter they shared, the late-night conversations. It was as if Jessica was choreographing their interactions to incite jealousy. Just then, Richard's key turned in the lock, and the door swung open. He stepped in, looking tired but handsome in his tailored suit, a briefcase in one hand and a takeout bag in the other. "Hey, babe, I picked up some Thai. Hope you're hungry," he said, throwing her a bright smile that faltered as he noticed her expression. "Richard, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "Sure, what's on your mind?" He set the takeout aside, his brow furrowing. "It's about Jessica," she said, the name tasting bitter on her tongue. "I found some messages on your phone." Richard's demeanor shifted instantly. "Emily, I told you. She's just a secretary. You're reading too much into this," he replied, brushing off her concerns as if they were mere annoyances. "Reading too much? Richard, she's texting you about dinner and how much she looks forward to seeing you. How can you not see how that looks?" Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his posture. "I'm busy, Emily. We're working on a project that requires a lot of late nights." "She's just being professional." "Professional?" Emily echoed, incredulity lacing her voice. "It doesn't feel professional when she's sending you messages that sound so personal. Emily, you're overreacting. I can't believe you're letting your insecurities get the better of you," he said, his voice sharp. "Is that what this is? Insecurity?" she shot back, hurt mingling with anger. "I'm trying to protect our marriage and you're dismissing my feelings. How can you be so blind to what's happening?" Richard's expression hardened. "I'm not blind. I just don't want to entertain unfounded accusations. I thought we were beyond this. You trust me, don't you?" "Trust? How can I trust you when you're keeping secrets?" She struggled to keep her voice steady. "I feel like I don't know you anymore. Emily, please. You're making a mountain out of a molehill," he replied, exasperated. "Jessica is a great asset to the team. That's it. I can't just ignore the way you look at her, Richard. You used to look at me like that. What happened to us?" The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken fears and buried resentment. Richard turned away, his gaze fixed on the skyline through their expansive windows. "I don't know, Emily. I'm working hard for us. What more do you want from me?" Emily felt her heart shatter further. "I want you to be honest with me. If there's something going on, I need to know. It's tearing me apart." Richard remained silent, the weight of her words settling heavily between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I'm not having an affair. You have to believe me." But Emily felt the distance between them grow, an insurmountable chasm filled with doubt. "If you're not, then what are you doing? Because I can't keep living in this uncertainty." As the night wore on and the silence stretched, Emily realized they were at an impasse. She felt more alone than ever, lost in a sea of emotions that seemed to drown her. She picked at her food, the taste unappealing now, and Richard stared into space, the weight of their unresolved conflict looming over them. That night, as Emily lay in bed, the darkness around her felt suffocating. She stared at the ceiling, wrestling with her thoughts. She had always believed in Richard, in their love. But now doubt festered like an open wound. What if her fears were justified? What if Richard was indeed slipping away, lost in a world where she no longer existed? The thought was unbearable, and as tears rolled silently down her cheeks, she resolved to take control of the situation. She scoured the internet, piecing together Jessica's life, her past, and any connection that might reveal the depth of her relationship with Richard. As she navigated through various social media profiles, Emily stumbled upon a blog post about corporate espionage, detailing a scandal that had rocked the very industry Richard thrived in. The article mentioned a young woman who had been implicated in several high-stakes thefts of proprietary information. The name Jessica rang in her ears, and a chill ran down her spine. Could it be the same Jessica? With her heart racing, Emily clicked on the link, her eyes scanning the words hungrily. The more she read, the more pieces of a sinister puzzle fell into place. Jessica wasn't just a secretary. She had a history of deceit and manipulation, using her charm to infiltrate companies and exploit their vulnerabilities. Each revelation felt like a dagger to Emily's heart, twisting the knife deeper with every new detail. "Breathe, Emily. Just breathe," she whispered to herself, trying to steady the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to consume her. She picked up her phone and dialed Sarah's number, needing her friend's support more than ever. "Hey, Em, what's up?" Sarah's cheerful voice broke through the haze of Emily's thoughts. "I found something." "About Jessica," Emily said, her voice trembling slightly. "What did you find?" Sarah asked, her tone shifting to one of concern. "She's not just a secretary. She's been involved in corporate espionage. Richard has no idea who he's really dealing with," Emily replied, her words tumbling out in a rush. I thought she was just a pretty face, but she's dangerous. This isn't just a little office crush. She's targeting Richard's company." There was a brief silence on the other end, followed by a sharp inhale from Sarah. "Are you sure, Em? That's serious. You need to be careful." I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm in a nightmare," Emily confessed, her voice quaking. "I need to confront her. But what if she tries to turn Richard against me? Just be cautious. You have to protect yourself. And if you need me to come over, I will," Sarah offered, her voice steady and reassuring. "Thanks, Sarah. I'll think about it. I don't know how to handle this." As they continued to talk, Emily felt a flicker of strength igniting within her. If Jessica was indeed a threat, she needed to act quickly. The following day, Emily made her way to Richard's office, her resolve hardening with each step. The opulent lobby buzzed with activity, but her mind was laser-focused. She had to confront Jessica to understand the extent of her intentions. As she ascended in the elevator, she rehearsed her words in her mind, envisioning the confrontation that lay ahead. When she arrived at Richard's office, the door was slightly ajar. She could hear Richard's voice mingling with Jessica's laughter, a sound that made her stomach churn. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open. "Richard, can I speak to you for a moment?" she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Richard turned, surprise flickering across his features. "Of course, Emily. Just give us a moment, Jessica." He gestured for her to come in. Jessica, perched on the edge of Richard's desk, flashed Emily a smile that felt more like a challenge than a greeting. "Hi, Emily. Everything okay?" she asked, her tone overly bright. "Yeah, everything's fine," Emily replied, her heart racing. She could feel Jessica's gaze piercing through her, assessing her every move. "Can we talk privately?" Emily pressed, locking eyes with Richard, who nodded, though a hint of confusion clouded his expression. As they stepped into the adjacent conference room, Emily felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had to tread carefully, balancing her need for clarity with the fear of backlash. "Richard, I need to know about Jessica," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" he asked, brows furrowing in concern. "She's my secretary, Emily. You know that." "I know, but she's more than that. I found out that she's been involved in corporate espionage," Emily blurted, her heart racing as she watched Richard's reaction. "Espionage? Emily, that's a serious accusation," he replied, his voice laced with disbelief. "You can't just assume that because she's young and attractive." "I'm not assuming. I've done my research. She's been linked to several incidents. Richard, you need to be careful. She could be after your company," Emily insisted, desperation creeping into her tone. Richard crossed his arms, a defensive gesture that made Emily's heart sink. "You're overreacting. Jessica is brilliant. She's helped me with some major deals. You're letting your insecurities cloud your judgment." "Cloud my judgment? Richard, this isn't about me. It's about you and your company." Emily shot back, frustration boiling over. You're so wrapped up in your admiration for her that you're blind to the risks she poses. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I appreciate your concern, but I trust Jessica. She's proven herself time and again. Trust? You think you really know her? Emily's voice broke, the pain of his dismissal cutting deeper than she expected. I can't stand by and watch you put everything at risk because of a pretty face. Emily, this is getting out of hand. Richard's tone was firm, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. You need to let this go. Let this go. Emily echoed, incredulous. You're choosing to ignore something that could destroy everything we've built. The tension in the room was palpable, each word hanging heavy in the air. Emily could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the reality of their situation crashing down around her. She had to act, but how? Richard, please, just promise me you'll be vigilant, Emily said, her voice softening. I don't want to lose you to someone who has ulterior motives. He looked at her, his expression shifting from defensiveness to something more vulnerable. I'll consider what you've said, but I can't just cast her aside based on rumors. Emily nodded, feeling a mix of fear and frustration. She knew that she had laid her cards on the table, but the battle wasn't over. As they sat in the flickering light of their living room, a sense of newfound understanding began to envelop them. They were still standing on shaky ground, but for the first time in weeks, they were on the same side again. Emily could feel the weight of the world begin to lift, but uncertainty still lingered in the back of her mind. Would their commitment hold strong against the storm that Jessica represented? Let's go to bed, Richard suggested gently, breaking the silence. We can talk more in the morning. It's late, and we both need rest. Okay, Emily replied, her heart still racing but now with a flicker of hope. Good night, Richard. Good night, Emily. As they walked to their bedroom, the air between them felt lighter, the promise of a new beginning hanging in the air. Yet, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the calm before the storm. The truth about Jessica still loomed, and she knew that the real test of their marriage was yet to come, when suddenly the doorbell rang, shattering the fragile calm. Who could that be? Emily asked, her brow furrowing as she glanced at Richard, who looked equally surprised. I'll get it, he replied, the unease returning to his features as he moved toward the door. When Richard opened it, standing there was Jessica, the very embodiment of the chaos that had invaded their lives. She wore a sleek black dress that hugged her figure, her hair cascading over her shoulders like a waterfall. The air seemed to thicken as she stood there, a confident smile playing on her lips. Sorry to interrupt, Jessica said, her voice smooth like silk. I have some important news regarding the company. Emily's heart sank. The last person she wanted in their home at that moment was Jessica, and yet here she was, as if summoned by the tension that had been brewing all evening. Jessica, now is not really a good time, Richard said, glancing back at Emily, whose expression was a mix of resentment and disbelief. Oh, come on, Richard. This can't wait, she insisted, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. It's about the merger. There's something you need to know. Richard sighed, a look of conflict washing over his face. Emily could see him weighing the options, the urgency of business against the emotional turmoil of the moment. It felt like a betrayal, even before Jessica had opened her mouth. Fine, let's hear it, Richard said, his voice tinged with irritation. Jessica crossed her arms and leaned against the doorframe, her demeanor casual yet commanding. I just found out that a major competitor is planning to sabotage our merger, she revealed, her eyes darting between Richard and Emily. They've been gathering intel on us for weeks. Emily's heart raced, not just from the shocking news, but from the way Jessica seemed to revel in the tension. It was as if she thrived on the discord she had sown between Richard and Emily. And how do you know this? Richard pressed, his tone shifting from annoyance to concern. Jessica straightened, her expression hardening. Because I'm not just your secretary, Richard. I'm the daughter of David Carter. The name hung in the air like a heavy weight. David Carter was a figure Richard both respected and feared. Once a formidable opponent in the business world, he had fallen from grace, his empire crumbling due to what many speculated was Richard's ruthless strategy. Emily felt her stomach drop. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jessica's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "I've been watching you, Richard. This was never just about a job for me. It's personal." Richard's face paled, realization dawning on him. "You're saying you're here for revenge? Revenge?" "No," Jessica replied, tilting her head slightly, as if she were considering the idea for the first time. "I'm here to reclaim what was stolen from my family. Your success came at a cost, and I'm here to ensure you pay that price." Emily felt a rush of emotions. Anger, betrayal, confusion, all swirling within her. This was the woman who had intruded into their lives, and now it seemed she had a vendetta that made everything that had transpired even more sinister. "Why now?" Richard asked, his voice strained. "Why reveal this now?" Jessica shrugged, a hint of amusement dancing in her eyes. "Because I think you should know who you're dealing with, Richard. And because I wanted to see how far you'd go to protect what you have. It's quite fascinating, really. Fascinating." Emily echoed incredulously. "This isn't some game, Jessica. You've been manipulating us both. You've destroyed our trust." Jessica turned her gaze on Emily, her expression shifting to one of cold amusement. "Trust? You think trust exists in a world like this?" She gestured around the luxurious apartment, filled with evidence of wealth and privilege. "You're all players in a game, and I'm just here to shake things up." Richard stepped forward, his voice rising. "You need to leave. You've done enough damage." Jessica laughed softly, a chilling sound that sent shivers down Emily's spine. "Damage? Oh, Richard, you have no idea. The real damage is yet to come." "What do you mean?" Richard demanded, his tone sharp. "I mean, the merger isn't the only thing at stake here. People are watching you. You think I'm the only one with a stake in this?" Emily caught her breath. "What are you saying?" she pressed, her heart pounding. Jessica took a step closer, her voice lowering conspiratorially. "I'm saying that the business world is cutthroat, and you're both in over your heads. I could help you, but only if you're willing to play by my rules." Richard shook his head in disbelief. "You think I'd trust you after all of this? Trust is a luxury," Jessica replied coolly. "But survival, that's the real game. You have a choice. Work with me or watch everything you've built come crashing down." Emily felt the walls closing in, the air thick with tension and uncertainty. She looked at Richard, searching for a flicker of the man she had married, but all she saw was a man backed into a corner, grappling with his own demons. "Emily," Richard began, his voice softer, almost pleading, "I need to know what you think. This isn't just about me anymore." Emily's mind raced. She felt torn between the man she loved and the reality of the situation. How could she trust him or Jessica? "I don't know," she finally admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can trust either of you." Just as the weight of their choices hung heavy in the room, Emily's phone buzzed on the table, jolting her from her spiraling thoughts. She glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number. "Who is it?" Richard asked, his curiosity piqued. "I don't know," Emily replied, her fingers hovering over the screen. "Should I answer? Maybe it's important," Richard said, glancing at Jessica, who watched with an amused expression. Taking a deep breath, Emily swiped to answer. "Hello?" A voice, low and gravelly, came through the line. "Emily Thompson?" "Yes, who is this?" she asked, her pulse quickening. "It's time for a conversation about your husband's future. Meet me at the usual place and come alone." Before she could respond, the line went dead, leaving her gripping her phone tightly, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty. "Emily," Richard said, concern etching his features. "What was that about?" I don't know," she stammered, feeling the weight of the unknown press down on her. Jessica raised an eyebrow, her interest piqued. "Looks like you have a secret admirer, Emily." "Shut up, Jessica," Richard snapped, anger flaring in his eyes. Emily stood frozen, caught in a whirlwind of emotions. As she looked from Richard to Jessica, she realized that everything she thought she understood about her life was unraveling. The stakes had never been higher, and the ground beneath her felt uncertain. With Jessica's revelation and the mysterious phone call hanging in the air, nothing would ever be the same again. The future was a dark, twisting path, and Emily was left standing at the crossroads, unsure which direction to take.